In the chaos of a crowded airport, a weary single dad, his young daughter clinging to his hand, spotted a woman collapsing amidst the rush. Without hesitation, he dove through the crowd, his calloused hand steadying her trembling frame as her eyes fluttered in panic. His daughter's wide eyes watched her hero in action, unaware of the storm brewing in his heart. Years of struggle flashed before him. Sleepless nights, a lost job, a shattered life. But nothing prepared him for the truth. This woman, now safe in his arms, was the CEO who'd destroyed everything he'd built. Would saving her redeem his past or reopen wounds too deep to heal? The morning sun barely pierced the gray haze of the city as Daniel trudged through the cramped apartment, his boots scuffing the worn linoleum floor. At 38, his broad shoulders sagged under the weight of a life that felt heavier each day. His calloused hands, rough from years of manual labor, moved with practiced care as he packed a small lunchbox with a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, his daughter Lily's favorite. The faint hum of a flickering fluorescent light filled the room, casting shadows over the peeling wallpaper and the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. Daniel's eyes, once bright with ambition, now carried a quiet exhaustion, etched with lines that told stories he'd rather forget. Every dawn was a ritual of survival. He rose before the world stirred, slipping into a faded jacket that still smelled faintly of motor oil from his days as a mechanic. The apartment was a patchwork of their life together. Lily's crayon drawings taped to the fridge, a second-hand couch sagging in the corner, and a single photo of a younger Daniel, smiling beside a woman whose absence still lingered like a ghost. Lily, just 7, slept soundly in her tiny bed, her chestnut curls spilling over a pillow too big for her small frame. Daniel paused at her door, his heart tightening as he watched her chest rise and fall. She was his anchor, his reason to keep moving through a world that seemed determined to break him. 3 years ago, everything had unraveled. Daniel had been a rising star at a small manufacturing firm, a lead mechanic with dreams of owning his own shop. But when a corporate giant swallowed the company, a faceless CEO's decision to cut costs had left him jobless, his savings drained by medical bills from his wife's illness. Her death had followed swiftly, a cruel blow that left Daniel and Lily alone in a world that felt colder without her. Now he pieced together a living through odd jobs, delivery runs, handyman gigs, anything to keep the lights on. Each paycheck was a tightrope walk, stretched thin between rent, groceries, and Lily's school supplies. The city around them was unforgiving. Towering skyscrapers loomed over their run-down neighborhood, a constant reminder of the wealth that felt out of reach. Daniel navigated its streets with a quiet resolve, his weathered face blending into the crowd of early-morning commuters. But beneath his stoic exterior, a storm churned. Guilt gnawed at him. Guilt for the life he couldn't give Lily, for the moments he missed while working late, for the dreams he'd buried alongside his wife. He saw her absence in Lily's eyes, in the way she clung to his hand a little tighter when they passed families laughing together. Lily was his light in the darkness. Her giggles filled the apartment when he tickled her awake, her small voice chattering about school projects, or the stray cat she'd named Whiskers. She had her mother's spirit, fierce, curious, and kind despite the hardships she was too young to fully understand. Daniel poured every ounce of himself into her, braiding her hair with clumsy fingers, reading bedtime stories until his voice grew hoarse, and shielding her from the weight of their struggles. But the cracks showed. He'd catch her staring at other kids' new sneakers or overhearing her wish for a real Christmas tree, and each moment was a quiet dagger to his heart. Their mornings were a dance of routine. Daniel would wake Lily with a gentle nudge, her sleepy protests melting into a smile as he handed her a mismatched pair of socks. They'd sit at the wobbly kitchen table, sharing a breakfast of toast and cheap coffee for him, milk for her. He'd listen to her ramble about her dreams, an astronaut one day, a veterinarian the next, his chest swelling with pride and ache in equal measure. Then he'd walk her to the bus stop, her tiny hand in his, her backpack bouncing as she skipped over cracked sidewalks. The world felt softer in those moments, as if her laughter could drown out the noise of their struggles. But the weight always returned. As Daniel watched the school bus pull away, his mind would drift to the past, to the corporate office where he'd been handed a pink slip. The cold voice on the phone citing restructuring. The CEO's name was a shadow in his memory, a symbol of the faceless machine that had upended his life. He didn't dwell on it, couldn't afford to. There were deliveries to make, floors to scrub, and a daughter who needed him to keep going. Yet, in the quiet moments, anger simmered. A slow burn for the life stolen from them, for the dreams that had slipped through his fingers like sand. The airport job was a lifeline. Temporary gig unloading cargo. It paid just enough to cover the month's rent. Daniel arrived each day before dawn, his body aching from the previous shift, his mind focused on the promise of a paycheck. The airport was a world of its own, chaotic, relentless, alive with the hum of jet engines and the shuffle of travelers. He moved through it like a ghost, unnoticed among the polished suits and rolling suitcases, his work boots a stark contrast to the gleaming floors. Lily's photo tucked in his wallet was his tether, a reminder of why he endured the sore muscles and sleepless nights. On this particular morning, the air was thick with the scent of jet fuel and coffee. Daniel maneuvered a cart of luggage through the terminal, his eyes scanning the crowd out of habit. Travelers rushed past, their lives a blur of destinations and deadlines. He barely noticed them, his thoughts on Lily's upcoming school play and the costume he still needed to finish. But something about the day felt different, heavier, as if the universe was holding its breath. The terminal buzzed with its usual frenzy. Yet a strange stillness settled over Daniel, a premonition he couldn't shake. Little did he know, a single act of instinct was about to unravel the carefully guarded walls around his heart, pulling him toward a truth he'd never expected to face. The airport terminal thrummed with a restless energy, a symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps and distant announcements crackling over the intercom. Daniel pushed his luggage cart through the sea of travelers, his muscles straining under the weight of overstuffed bags. Sweat beaded on his brow, his faded work shirt clinging to his back as he navigated the polished chaos. The air was sharp with the tang of jet fuel and perfume, a reminder of lives moving forward, while his felt anchored in place. Lily's face flickered in his mind, her gap-toothed smile, her voice asking if he'd be at her school play. He tightened his grip on the cart, his calloused hands steady despite the ache in his chest. Every step was for her, every grunt of effort a promise to keep their fragile world intact. The crowd parted briefly, revealing a woman in a tailored coat stumbling near a coffee kiosk. Her knees buckled, her handbag slipping from her shoulder as she clutched her chest. The world seemed to slow, the hum of the terminal fading into a dull roar. Daniel's instincts kicked in, honed by years of protecting Lily from scraped knees and nightmares. He abandoned his cart, weaving through startled travelers, his boots thudding against the floor. The woman's face was pale, her breath shallow, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored something buried deep in Daniel's own heart. He knelt beside her, his rough hands gentle as he steadied her trembling frame, guiding her to sit against the kiosk's counter. Her pulse raced under his fingers, fragile but stubborn, like a bird fighting to take flight. The crowd closed in, a blur of curious faces and half-hearted offers of help. Daniel's voice, though silent in this moment, was a steady rhythm in his mind, urging calm. He scanned her for signs of distress, a medical bracelet, a phone, anything to explain the collapse. Her handbag lay open, spilling its contents. A sleek phone, a boarding pass, a monogrammed pen glinting under the terminal's harsh lights. He reached for the phone, intending to call for help, when his eyes caught a name on the boarding pass. Eleanor Voss. The world tilted. His breath hitched, his fingers freezing mid-motion. That name. It was a ghost from a past he'd tried to bury. A name tied to the corporate machine that had gutted his life 3 years ago. Eleanor Voss, the CEO of Apex Industries, the woman whose signature had sealed the closure of his company, leaving him and dozens of others jobless. The memory surged unbidden. The sterile conference room, the HR manager's cold voice, the severance check that barely covered a month's rent. Daniel's world had crumbled then, his wife's illness worsening as their savings dwindled. Eleanor's name had been a shadow in his nightmares, a faceless symbol of loss. And now here she was, not a titan in a boardroom but a fragile figure gasping for air, her fate in his hands. His heart pounded, torn between the instinct to help and the resentment that clawed at his chest. Why her? Why now? He shoved the thought aside, his hands moving on autopilot. He loosened her scarf, checked her pulse again, and waved down a passing airport worker to call for medics. The woman's eyes fluttered, meeting his for a fleeting moment. They were green, sharp despite her weakness, and carried a flicker of recognition. Or was it gratitude? Daniel couldn't tell. His mind was a storm. Memories of Lily's hungry nights colliding with the image of this woman who'd unknowingly set that suffering in motion. He wanted to walk away, to let someone else take over, but Lily's voice echoed in his head. "You're my hero." Did he? He stayed, his jaw tight, his hands steady. Medics arrived, their red bags clattering as they knelt beside Eleanor. Daniel stepped back, his breath uneven, watching as they checked her vitals and murmured about low blood sugar. The crowd dispersed, the terminal swallowing the moment as if it had never happened. But for Daniel, the world had shifted. He retrieved his cart, his movements mechanical, his mind replaying that name. Eleanor Voss. The boarding pass was still in his hand, crumpled from his grip. He should have tossed it, let it disappear into the chaos, but something stopped him. A question burned in his chest. Did she know what she'd done to him? To Lily? He returned to work, hauling luggage through the terminal. But the rhythm of his day was broken. Each step felt heavier, each glance at a traveler's face a reminder of her. He saw her in his mind's eye. Not the collapsing woman, but the faceless CEO in a glass tower signing away his future. The resentment he'd buried for years clawed its way to the surface, raw and jagged. Yet beneath it, a quieter voice whispered. She was human, vulnerable, just like him. The conflict churned, a knot he couldn't untangle. He glanced at Lily's photo in his wallet, her smile anchoring him. What would she think of him if he let anger win? Hours later, during a break in the employee lounge, Daniel sat with a lukewarm coffee, the boarding pass still in his pocket. The lounge was a drab corner of the airport, its walls stained with years of spilled drinks and fleeting dreams. He pulled out the pass, smoothing it on the table. Eleanor Voss, first class, flight 214 to New York. A business trip, no doubt. He imagined her in a boardroom, commanding attention, oblivious to the lives she'd upended. But the image clashed with the woman he'd seen. Pale, fragile, human. His fingers traced the name, his mind teetering on the edge of a decision. He could let this go, pretend it never happened. Or he could find her, confront her, demand answers for the pain she'd caused. The thought of confrontation sent a jolt through him. He wasn't that man, angry, vengeful. He was Lily's dad, the one who braided her hair, who stayed up late sewing costumes, who carried her through grief. But the past was a weight he couldn't shake, and Eleanor's name was a key to unlocking it. He slipped the pass back into his pocket, his heart racing. The terminal was still bustling outside, but a plan was forming. Quiet and unyielding. He'd find her gate, see if she was still there. Not to accuse, not yet, just to understand. To look into the eyes of the woman who'd changed his life and see if she carried any trace of regret. The airport's clock ticked toward noon, the crowd swelling as flights boarded. Daniel moved through the terminal, his cart forgotten, his eyes scanning signs for Flight 214. The boarding area was a sleek lounge, all glass and chrome, a world apart from his own. Travelers in tailored suits sipped espressos, their lives untouched by the struggles he knew too well. He spotted her near a window, her coat draped over a chair, her posture composed despite the earlier collapse. She was typing on a laptop, her face lit by the screen's glow. Daniel's breath caught. This was it, the moment to walk away or step forward. But what would he find if he crossed that line? He lingered at the edge of the lounge, unnoticed among the travelers. His hands clenched, the boarding pass a burning weight in his pocket. Eleanor looked up, her gaze sweeping the room, and for a heartbeat it landed on him. Did she recognize him? Did she know? The question hung in the air, a thread pulling him toward her. He took a step, then stopped, his heart a battlefield of duty and pain. Lily's face flashed in his mind, her trust in him a beacon. Whatever he did next, it would change everything. But could he face the truth of who Eleanor was, and what she'd meant to his life, without losing the man Lily believed him to be? The airport lounge shimmered with an artificial calm, its glass walls reflecting the frenetic pulse of travelers beyond. Daniel stood at the edge of the first-class lounge, his work boots scuffing the polished floor. A stark intruder in a world of tailored suits and quiet wealth. His heart thundered, each beat a clash of rage and restraint. Eleanor Voss sat by the window, her silhouette framed against the gray sky, her fingers pausing over her laptop. The boarding pass in Daniel's pocket felt like a live wire, its edges worn from his restless grip. Eleanor Voss. The name that had haunted him for 3 years, now attached to a face, a woman who moments ago had been fragile in his arms, her life teetering on the edge of collapse. But now she was composed, her sharp green eyes scanning documents, oblivious to the man whose world she'd once shattered. Daniel's breath was uneven, his hands trembling as he took a step closer. The lounge's soft jazz clashed with the storm in his chest. Every fiber of him screamed to turn back, to return to the anonymity of his cargo cart, to the life he'd carved out for Lily. But the weight of the past held him fast. He saw it all again. The pink slip, the hospital bills piling up, his wife's frail hand slipping from his as she faded. Eleanor's signature had been the first domino, toppling his dreams, his stability, his hope. And yet he'd saved her today, his hand steadying her when she fell. The irony was a blade, twisting deeper with every second he stood there watching her. He moved closer, weaving through leather chairs and polished tables, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. The lounge's air was cool, scented with espresso and wealth, but Daniel felt only the heat of his own conflict. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough to see the faint lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed as if carrying her own unseen burdens. His mind churned with questions. Did she know the lives she'd upended? Did she ever think of the families left in the wake of her decisions? Or was she just another cog in a machine too vast for guilt? He wanted to hate her, to let the anger he'd buried for years spill out. But something in her posture, vulnerable despite her power, held him back. Eleanor looked up, her gaze locking with his. For a moment, the world froze. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition passing through them. Did she know him? Had she seen his face in some forgotten file, a name on a list of layoffs? Daniel's throat tightened, his resolve wavering. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Only the weight of Lily's trust, her voice calling him her hero. He couldn't be the man who lashed out, not for her. Instead, he reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing the crumpled boarding pass. He held it out, a silent offering, his eyes searching hers for something. Remorse, understanding, anything. She took the pass, her fingers brushing his, cool against his calloused warmth. Her brow furrowed as she glanced at it, then back at him. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. Daniel's heart was a battlefield, torn between confrontation and retreat. He wanted to ask why. Why his job, why his life, why her decisions had left him scraping by while she sat in first-class lounges. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he saw Lily's face, her crayons scattered across their tiny kitchen table, her laughter filling the cracks of their broken world. He couldn't unravel that for her, not even for answers. Eleanor's expression shifted, softening. She set the boarding pass down, her hands folding in her lap. The gesture was small, deliberate, but it carried a weight Daniel couldn't name. He felt exposed, as if she could see the years of struggle etched into his face, the nights he'd cried alone after Lily was asleep. His anger, once a roaring fire, began to falter, replaced by a deeper ache, a longing for closure, for a way to move forward without the past dragging him under. He took a step back, his boots heavy on the floor, his mind racing. What was he even doing here? Seeking justice? Redemption? Or just a chance to be seen? The lounge's intercom crackled, announcing the boarding of Flight 214. Eleanor stood, her movements slow, deliberate, as if she, too, was caught in the gravity of the moment. She gathered her coat, her laptop, her composure, but her eyes lingered on Daniel. For a heartbeat, he thought she might speak, might offer something to bridge the chasm between them. But she only nodded, a gesture so subtle it might have been imagined. Daniel's chest tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. He wanted to shout, to demand she acknowledge the pain she'd caused, but Lily's face held him back. He was her father first, not a man chasing ghosts. As Eleanor moved toward the gate, Daniel's gaze fell to the table where she'd sat. A small card lay there, half hidden beneath her coffee cup. His breath caught as he approached, his fingers trembling as he picked it up. It was a business card, sleek and embossed, her name in bold letters, Eleanor Voss, CEO, Apex Industries. But on the back, scrawled in hurried ink, was a note. "Thank you. I won't forget." The words hit him like a wave, stirring something raw and unnameable. Was it an apology? A promise? Or just a fleeting gesture from a woman who didn't know his name? He turned the card over in his hands, the weight of it heavier than the boarding pass. The lounge was emptying now, travelers streaming toward their gates, but Daniel stood rooted, the card a tether to a moment he couldn't fully grasp. His mind replayed the collapse, her trembling form, the way he'd acted without thought because it was what he did. Protected, provided, endured. But this note, this fragile connection to the woman who'd upended his life, cracked something open in him. He saw his wife's hospital bed, Lily's tear-streaked face, the endless nights of scraping by. And now this, a thank you from the woman who'd set it all in motion. Tears pricked his eyes unbidden as the weight of 3 years pressed down. He'd saved her not for her sake, but for his own, for the man he wanted Lily to believe in. Yet the note in his hand felt like a mirror, reflecting a truth he wasn't ready to face. Eleanor wasn't just a villain in his story. She was human, flawed, carrying her own unseen scars. The realization was a quiet earthquake, shaking the foundations of his anger. He slipped the card into his pocket, his heart a tangle of grief and grace. The gate was closing, Eleanor's figure disappearing into the crowd. But the choice was his now, to carry the hate or let it go. As the lounge fell silent, Daniel stood alone, the card burning in his pocket, the note's words echoing in his mind. He thought of Lily waiting at home, her school play tomorrow, her trust in him unwavering. He'd saved a life today, but what would it cost him to face the truth of who Eleanor was, and who he'd become in the shadow of her actions? The answer hung in the air, a cliffhanger etched in his trembling hands, as the airport's hum swallowed his next step. The airport's hum faded as Daniel stood in the emptying lounge, the business card in his pocket, a quiet weight against his heart. The note, "Thank you, I won't forget," burned in his mind, its hurried ink a riddle he couldn't unravel. Eleanor Voss had vanished through the gate, her silhouette swallowed by the crowd, but her presence lingered like a shadow cast across his life. Daniel's boots felt heavier as he turned away, the terminal's polished chaos blurring around him. His shift wasn't over, but the world felt different now, as if the air itself carried the echo of a choice he hadn't yet made. He clutched Lily's photo in his wallet, her smile a beacon pulling him back to the life they'd built from ashes. He returned to his cart, the rhythm of work a familiar anchor. Luggage thumped against metal, his hands moving on instinct, but his mind was elsewhere. The card in his pocket was a tether to the past, Eleanor's name, her note, the memory of her collapse. He saw her again, pale and trembling, her green eyes meeting his in a moment of raw vulnerability. She wasn't the faceless CEO he'd imagined, not anymore. She was human, flawed, carrying burdens he couldn't know. The anger he'd nursed for 3 years, anger at her, at the world, at himself, felt less certain now, fraying at the edges. But what replaced it? Forgiveness? Understanding? Or just the exhaustion of carrying a grudge too heavy for one man to bear? As his shift ended, the sun dipped low, painting the terminal's windows in hues of gold and amber. Daniel walked to the bus stop, his body aching but his heart heavier. The city sprawled before him, its towering skyscrapers indifferent to the struggles below. He thought of Lily, waiting at home with her school play costume half sewn, her laughter a light that kept his world from collapsing. The card in his pocket felt like a question he wasn't ready to answer, but he couldn't ignore it either. He boarded the bus, the card's edges pressing against his thigh, and let his mind drift to the life he'd fought for, the one he'd built for Lily. Piece by painful piece. At home, the apartment was quiet, the faint scent of crayons and instant coffee lingering in the air. Lily was sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by glitter and construction paper, her small hands crafting a poster for her play. Her eyes lit up as Daniel stepped inside, her voice a silent melody in the narration of his thoughts. He knelt beside her, his rough fingers brushing a curl from her face, and felt the weight of the day settle into something softer. She showed him her poster, a wobbly drawing of a princess and a dragon, her name scrawled proudly at the bottom. His chest swelled, pride and love mingling with the ache of all he couldn't give her. That night, after Lily was tucked into bed, her stuffed bear clutched tight, Daniel sat at the kitchen table. The card lay before him, its embossed letters glinting under the dim light. He traced the note's words, his mind replaying the airport, the collapse, the moment their eyes met. He'd saved her, not because of who she was, but because of who he was. A father, a protector, a man who refused to let the world's cruelty define him. The realization was a quiet tide, washing away the sharp edges of his resentment. Eleanor's actions had broken his life, but they hadn't broken him. He'd built something new, something stronger for Lily. He rose, moving to the window, the city's lights a distant constellation. The card was still in his hand, but its weight had changed. It wasn't a chain to the past anymore. It was a choice. He could carry the anger, let it fester. Or he could let it go, not for Eleanor, but for himself, for Lily. He thought of her school play, the way she'd beam at him from the stage, her trust in him unwavering. He'd spent years fighting to be her hero, but maybe being a hero meant more than saving others. It meant saving himself from the prison of his own pain. The next morning, Daniel woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He packed Lily's lunch with care, slipping an extra apple into her bag, and walked her to the bus stop, her hand warm in his. The city felt lighter, the air crisper, as if the world had taken a breath with him. At the airport, he moved through his shift with a quiet strength, his eyes no longer scanning for ghosts. The card stayed in his pocket, not as a burden but as a reminder, a symbol of a moment where he'd chosen compassion over hate, action over despair. He didn't need Eleanor's apology or her regret. He'd found something better, the man he'd become in spite of her. That evening, Daniel sat in the school auditorium, his work shirt swapped for a clean sweater, his heart full as Lily took the stage. Her princess costume sparkled under the lights, the seams he'd sewn late at night holding strong. She waved at him, her smile brighter than the spotlight, and he felt tears prick his eyes, not of grief but of gratitude. The audience clapped, but Daniel's world was just her, his daughter, his reason to keep going. The card was still in his pocket, but it no longer burned. He'd let go, not of the past, but of its power to define him. As the play ended and Lily ran to him, her arms wrapping around his neck, Daniel felt the final pieces of his heart settle. The city outside hummed with its endless rhythm, but in that moment, it was just them, father and daughter, unbroken by the world's weight. He carried her home, her laughter echoing in the cool night air, and realized that this was his redemption, not in confronting Eleanor, not in rewriting the past, but in choosing love over pain day after day. For the little girl who called him her hero, the stars above glittered faintly, a quiet witness to their journey. Daniel's steps were steady, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Life hadn't given him answers, but it had given him Lily, and that was enough. Sometimes the greatest victories weren't in battles won or wrongs righted, but in the quiet moments of choosing to move forward, to love fiercely despite the scars. And as Daniel tucked Lily into bed that night, her small hand in his, he knew he'd found his peace, not in the shadow of what was lost, but in the light of what he'd built.